Hi, Sarah. I feel like the volume of this one feels like lower.
Yeah. There's almost a heaviness just on this subject, I think. Just even beginning to engage with the subject, I feel
Yeah.
a little bit heavy. We've touched on this subject before in episodes previously about depression and how that might show up in food and what that might mean in recovery, but it's a huge topic. And I think there's plenty more that we can say.
Yes. Okay. Like, I don't know where to begin. It is too broad.
I know.
Um,
Something that's always struck me about your story is where you talk about your depression switching from depression to anxiety. And that's, remember the first time you told me that, I was like, wow, that is, I guess I hadn't heard of that before. And it just hit me as, I don't know, I've not heard of that experience. Maybe other people might have had that
yeah.
experience. And then the other piece that's coming up in my head is when I went to New York and I was hanging out with the New York therapists, one of them, her whole thing, interest, niche, if you like, was anxiety. And her, I already feel like I know how you're going to react to this, but let's see. Her, well, I say her theory, she spoke about it like it was a fact,
I remember
was
this.
that anxiety is a protection from the real issue, which is depression.
I haven't thought of that.
And
I
that
don't,
if you let go of anxiety,
you'll find you're
you'll
depressed.
be left with depression. That's the real problem, and anxiety covers it up.
So I have a theory personally on what depression and anxiety are that doesn't feel true to me, which is that depression and anxiety are just different states of the. Do you know what I'm going to say?
No way. Different states of the nervous
That's all
system.
right.
One's a shutdown and one's an activation.
Correct. Correct. Right. So we do have three different branches of the nervous system, and one of them is freeze, shutdown, dorsal vagal, right? This is where depression would be said to live. And the another one is sympathetic, which is fight or flight, and it's more activated. And that when you watch mammals, there is a progression in a stress response that goes through sympathetic activation in a typical stress response to, and it kind of hangs out there. And if it's if we're in all this chaos and all this activation and we're running away and we're fighting and we're trying to get through and it's not working for an extended period of time, we will collapse. So there's a bit of a helplessness in that. So almost like the dorsal vagal is I don't want to say that it's the next level of the stress response because it doesn't have to be. Sometimes people just go straight there. It's just different ways that your body copes. And sometimes that shutdown can come from spending too long in sympathetic slash anxiety, but many people just stay in anxiety. I know people who live in anxiety for a long, long time. But there can be part of that typical response can be that once we're in that sort of anxious place, that in order to reach to come back down sometimes to level to what's called ventral vagal connectedness, that we would need to recuperate some of that. So we would like kind of all that energy we're spending. It does need a little bit of time to. We can't just go right back down to. You can just go right back down to connection, but oftentimes like it needs some space to do that, and then that would maybe be where you would move from anxiety into depression in order to sort of come back down. I could understand that, but I don't think it's particularly the theory because I am so much less anxious than I was, but I still lean more into anxiety and I don't feel like I'm depressed. Like I just know the difference because I don't feel like that's underneath it. Um I just don't. And I just
Yeah.
all I can tell you about that is that I feel it. So I
Mm.
have no data, but I know what depression does feel like and I'm pretty self-aware. So I feel like I might like if I was feeling depressed, I would probably have a hunch
Mhm.
that was still lurking. That would just be my personal experience.
Yeah, because we know that you don't self-deceive, so
Right.
you'd
That's what I
know.
mean. That's what I mean.
You'd know. I also think it's overly simplistic. It's that whole, well, this is because of this, and then you take this away, and this is the truth of it, as if there's only one experience of this. I see it in my own experience as being massively linked to my health problems. It feels like a drop in energy. And then the drop in energy, this sort of lack of vitality, strength, that for me was a big part of it. And then, of course, I think in periods of my life, it's been really triggered by shame, again, disconnection, because that's another way people talk about depression, is they say the solution to depression is connection and purpose, is it? Or is it just connection? I can't remember. There's a few people that talk about it in different ways. It is a broad topic. But I think for me, because mine always felt very cyclical, as in it might be a couple of weeks and then a couple of weeks, not a couple of weeks. It had this real kind of up and down. There have been a couple of periods of my life where it might have been consistent for a longer period of time, but most of it outside of that has been this kind of up and down. So the challenges, I think, for me from a recovering from disordered eating perspective was when I was more up, I felt much more motivated. I could remember all the things that helped me and I cared enough to put them into practice. Whereas when I was low, it was like, I just don't care. Doesn't matter anyway. And the bit that used to make it most challenging is when I was low, I would really feel like actually this was the reality of things. And anytime I wasn't low was just me kidding myself.
Right.
That story was extremely problematic. And it's one that I think occasionally I get caught up in it. I had one a couple of months ago, maybe even like not quite a couple of months ago. Yeah, when I came back from the US, I had a couple of days that were just really, really dark, really dark. And it felt like this darkness had come and was never going to go. And I believed it. And that was quite scary. And then it went. And I was like, of course it goes.
Yeah.
Of course it goes. Obviously, I'm on hormone replacement. That I think that there are certain times in my cycle where the world gets very dark. I have no energy. And it sucks. It sucks. But as long as I don't get caught up in that this is somehow the reality of who I am, I think I can remember having a therapy session when I felt like this once, where I was telling my therapist that I felt like the real me was just someone who was incredibly lazy, who would do nothing for herself and wouldn't look after herself. And every other experience of myself is me fighting against that. And I really believed it. And then when I wasn't feeling like that, I thought, no, that's not true. It's not like when I'm not feeling low that I'm battling it. It's making me think of, did you see Marcus's reel the other day where he just had all the different voices talking? One of them was so depressed and one of them was judging, one of them was this. It's like, but which one's the real me? I feel like that in the moment. I don't know. What are you asking me for, Steph? You say something.
Well, I mean, gee, I was just giving you room, man. But I feel like that's an IFS entry point, right? Like the parts theory of like that they're all a part of us. I think that's a helpful way to look at it. Not that I am not well enough versed in IFS to talk about it, but just that maybe we're not one thing, obviously, and that there's different parts we all have, and that some of them are more shadowy, right? Because I don't talk about feeling depressed as much because I would call it now like more dysthymia because I don't linger in it. And I feel like when I was depressed, it was so heavy, so long and so chronic. So
you want to share what that word means? Because I don't think everyone will know.
So almost like on a spectrum, right? Like the dysthymia would be just lower, but it's not like a full-fledged, just diagnostically, if you might be more well-versed in the diagnosis parameters, but it's more of a passing thing and it's not quite as low. So I feel like that when I compare it to, because I don't feel like I experienced depression like I used to, but I certainly go back into that place and I like have hints of it. And I really sometimes think, well, is the only reason that I don't go into the full blown because I'm actually have just, it's like when you come out of something for long enough, which anxiety did sort of bring me out of it, you form habits in that place and it's not just part of my habit anymore. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that it's a habit thing, but I'm saying that like there's so much more support in place for me to like I can use my routines now in a way that they had completely fallen apart before. So I'm not as liable to go into that deep dark hole because there's so many different things I've got now that help keep me afloat and that I can return to without it doesn't take the energy. And part of the depression is like this low energy. So before, being in that darkness would take so much energy for me to come out of it. Whereas now if I lean in that way, it doesn't take as much energy for me to come out of it because I've got so much in place. But I wonder, like sometimes I wonder if you let me, like, if you took all that away, if I didn't have routines, if one day I woke up and those things were not there, that I might be more susceptible to lingering longer and potentially more deeply. I sometimes think that. But I also feel like I identify with who I am now instead of identifying as a depressed person, which is what I used to feel like I was, to your point. Like I felt like that was the real me. And I no longer feel like that. I feel like it's a part of me and it can be a part of me. And I think that, but I feel like I equally have other parts of me that to recruit.
I agree with you with the routine front. I think that was a huge part of all of this for me, actually, having certain routines that came into place. Because for the longest time, I was just somebody who couldn't stick at routines. So when I started to really challenge myself to implement them in a less black and white way, all or nothing, to implement the routine for the sake of the routine itself instead of as an outcome thing. Because I feel like I would always start projects, whether it was a fitness project, whether it was a creative project, whatever it was, I would start. And then the minute I had my energy dip, that would be I'd step out and I don't step back in again. And so finding ways to do that. And of course, for me, it was through yoga and some meditation, which sounds like such a cliche. I know how it sounds, but it genuinely was in terms of what helped me at that time. And I think work really helped me as well then. So I was in the police and just having to be at work every day and being around fun people that I liked to be around would really help. So it would pull me out of myself for a few hours. This is the extrovert in me. Because I can see you're looking at me going, I'm not sure about this for me. But then when I went home, I'd crash. And I would just crash. But work was a reprieve from that. And it really did help me keep my head above water. Not the work, the people.
I understand. I mean, I'm not completely in disagreement. I think that I've certainly experienced times where I've been able to be lifted up from being with people and being in routines, but I've also experienced the opposite where it became just such a chore and so hard and so made it worse because I didn't want to be there. And that was again, and then I'm thinking, well, was it really anxiety underneath? Because it would make my blood boil. Like I'm picturing going to work, going to class, even going out with friends at times when I was depressed. I did it because I thought I should. And there were times that was helpful, but there were times where it was the opposite of helpful. And I felt angry and I felt like I just want to go home. I don't want to be here. And then I get mad, like, again, maybe that was more anxious. Like maybe there was some energy under there, but I didn't have the energy to do it. And I'm also thinking the closest I've come back to depression recently is actually a couple years ago, maybe it's 2.5 years ago now, when I moved into this house. I've talked about how it brought stuff up for me that I was not consciously aware of. But I would wake up. So since my daughter, who's now 13, has been born, that's where my anxiety flipped. I'm sorry, my depression flipped to more of the anxious running. And I, at that time in my life, I got out of bed. I bounced out of bed. Like, it was like, I had all this adrenaline all the time. So I just like would get out of bed. Whereas before that was like so hard. And that was a huge change. But for 13 years, I guess 11, that's how my mornings feel. I feel like I am like, what's up? What am I doing today? Like I get out of bed. It's not a thing. But at 2.5 years ago, I would open my eyes and I just want to close them again. And the routine was in place, but I just internally, no, I had no desire. And it scared the bejesus out of me because I was like, I haven't felt that way in over a decade. And I don't want to ever feel this way. And that lasted for a while. And I ended up going on antidepressants because I just knew. And that lasted a while and it's since resolved. And I don't feel that anymore. But that was a case for routines be damned, it didn't matter. It was just a sense. It was just this feeling of like, that's the best I don't have a desire. There was nothing in me that felt like invited to do that. It's so bad. I hate it. It's like such a scary feeling when, anyway. So I guess I'm saying that there's times where it feels like you can be helped by things, like these tools. And there's other times where it just feels like this state, you know what I mean? It's like, it's not no matter what's going on out here, it's like this something that lives inside. And that could still be my own bias, but like, even with helpful things, whether it's people or routines, like that might not even touch it.
Mm-hmm. It's like I was having this conversation, I can't even remember who it was with, when they were talking about someone in their life they were frustrated with because this person needed to do their physio or something, and they weren't taking care of themselves, this person. They weren't doing their physio. And it's bugging me because I can't remember who it was. It wasn't a work thing. I know that much. It was a friend. And as I was listening to him, I said, I get it. I totally could see myself, if the circumstances or whatever align or turn out that way, being that person who at some point in life just goes, I just don't want to look after myself anymore. Like, I feel like that's in me, the possibility of that. And if that part is activated and I can't pull myself out of that, then and the person was like, oh my goodness. I was like, no, I get it. I understand. Yeah, I feel like that process of being in that state where you just feel like nothing matters, looking after yourself just doesn't matter. It's too hard. It's like it suddenly feels too hard, like too much.
Yeah.
I get that.
I do too. And I've shared before that I had a friend who like stopped being friends with me because of that. Right? Like, I stopped taking care of myself and she couldn't deal with it. She just couldn't bystand anymore. She was like, I can't, it's frustrating. I can't watch, I can't understand it. And I can't witness, I don't want to be witness to it anymore. And so we stopped being friends for a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, I used to feel like that's a part of my personality that I have that lives inside of me. And I do feel now like it's a reflection to me of low energy in the body for some reason that is usually like, I think it's this mind-body connection. Like, I think that there's something that's taking away our emotional energy from an emotional, this emotional point of view that then becomes physical and is reflected back in a state. Why do you think people turn to food then in depression? And that's also not to say that everybody does, but do you think it seems more common?
Well, there's the serotonin theory. That one's a lot, that we get a serotonin boost from eating, particularly certain types of foods. So I think that can be one piece of it. I think it's almost when I feel heavier, I'm more drawn to food. And I mean that like from an energy perspective as well. So when I've been sitting all day, for example, and my body feels heavy and sluggish, it's almost like those are the times when I want to eat more compared to when I feel like I have good energy. So for me, I think there's a couple of pieces to it. There's almost something about matching the feeling of like wanting a dense food. So I might want something like pasta or something like that, something that creates that density in my stomach.
Like actual energy?
And then the other piece being about wanting to sort of pull, it's like I can't pull enough energy in. I think there's sort of two pieces of that. The first one a bit more psychoanalytical, the other one a bit more, trying to.
That one feels like that. They both feel plausible. It would just be for the psychological one, it would just be a question of like, why would we want to match it instead of counterbalance it? Whereas I think when I feel lighter, when I feel better, like lighter as in energetically lighter, there's more of an instinct to balance things. When I'm imbalanced, there's more of an instinct to imbalance things. And that's true for anxiety as well. So the more dysregulated I am, whether it's depression or anxiety, the more I want to become almost lean more towards both. In anxiety, I lean towards anxiety. In depression, I lean towards depression. When I'm feeling pretty regulated, I'm more inclined to keep things in balance, which is an interesting thing to watch. Like, what is that instinct around?
I like the language you use of the energy cycle. I'd not ever used that language on it before. And it makes a lot of sense to me now, because I would say I still go around these energy cycles where I go through these periods of really low energy. The big difference now, and it's been an absolute changer, is that I just have a much, much kinder voice in my head. And I don't see it. Say I don't see it. I don't see it like repeatedly as a personal failing. So there might be times, I don't know, if I don't do something that I wanted to get done because my energy was low, I'm going to feel more frustrated than I would if I was in a different place and I didn't do something. But that sense of, and I've spoken about it before, is I felt like before I was just in a cycle of chronic shame to the point where even being with myself is unbearable. That's different. I like,
yes.
And it's really, when you talk about how scary that feeling is, because, I'm a big fan on the whole of the idea of non-resistance to what we feel. But then there's a fear about that, because it is not, and resistance perhaps isn't the right word, but the fear of non-resistance is that if I allow this, I will just sink into it.
Right. And it will never stop.
My energy up.
with the energy theory, and this is proved true for me, and I'll illustrate it. The idea is that if you allow energy to do what it needs to do, it will not heal itself. It will
Pass quicker, will work
like
through.
it will do what it's trying to do. And that if we're resisting it, we're not allowing the energy to move the way it's asking to be moved. This again is part of somatic therapy. This is what it's all about. And that has been true in that when I was in my later teens, early 20s, throughout my 20s, depression was much more prevalent. I did not understand it as that. I did not think of it through that lens. It was personal. And I had been taught that too. So I had had a lot of feedback from friends and from my family that that was like a personality flaw. It's just because I didn't try hard enough. And I sat there in shame about it constantly. Now, if under this theory of like that there's a low energy pull, that the body is somehow saying there's been a lot of stress going on internally, externally, and I need to slow down because I'm carrying too much. And that, okay, so now we're in bed. We're not doing things, we're slowing down, but we're berating ourselves about that the whole time. You're not really slowing down. Like you're not offloading burden. You're just trading it for a different kind. And then the energy's it's not getting the rest that it's looking to get. Whereas now, if I were ever in that situation, and I was a couple years ago, I never once was like, oh my, look at you. You just don't try hard enough. I had the utmost compassion for myself. And I was like, oh, this is really hard. Okay, like we're going to need to slow down. We're going to need to change like our commitments, like we're going to need to really take care of this. And I did. And I got medication as well. And it did lift because I think it was allowed. I allowed myself to slow down. I allowed that burden to be removed. I allowed my body to do its thing. And it eventually gained the energy to say, I'm ready to return. So I think the shame part, I think we think about it and from a psychological point of view, but from an energetic point of view, it also works because shame is a lot of burdened energy. You're under a lot of stress when you're shaming yourself. And I don't know how many people are really forgiving themselves for feeling depressed or understanding it from the lens of like, this is something my body needs to do. Instead, we're like, you're just lazy. You are just, there's a lot of stigma with behaviors of depression.
Have you ever seen that meme? It's supposed to be Jim Carrey. He talks about depressed as actually a need for deep rest.
Yes, I haven't seen it, but yeah.
It's kind of a nice sentiment. And some people might have lives where they're thinking, that's all very well, but I can't slow down. I don't have the support in my life to be able to slow down. Maybe I'm a single parent, or maybe I'm not a single parent, but my partner's also very busy.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm conscious of that as somebody who I do have the privilege of having quite a lot of agency over my time and where I put my energy. I can honor that if I choose to. And I really want to acknowledge that that's kind of a privilege in my life circumstances that I can.
Yes, but even the shame part, I think, can be a major piece of that slowing down. Like, I think most of us are actually quite burdened internally, right? Like a lot of the need for deep rest might very well also come from the internal stress, the deep rest in there, not just on the outside, which is not to minimize like the people who are overworked and overstressed and completely burning out. But this is what Gabor Mate speaks about this. The book he wrote, it's called The Myth of Normal, where he talks about like, this is a systemic issue because we are living in a culture that is pushing hustle, pushing productivity, pushing doing, everything's scheduled, there's so much expectation. And that itself is creating, he suggests that depression and anxiety and chronic illness and all these things, he's suggesting that it is a byproduct of this imbalance in our societal expectations, that it's not actually this thing we just get, or this, it's not this fluke. It's actually the body saying, I'm not built for this and I need to slow down. And then we're in this conflict of, I live in a world where I can't, or where I live in a world where if I do, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to at least like, I'll be criticized, or I'm not going to be able to show up for my kids thing, all the things. I mean, this is what comes to my mind. Like if I slow down, my kids are going to suffer for it because there's so many places they got to be and things I got to sign them up for and go to. And it's more of like speaking to the way the world runs, and that's why we're seeing this increase in And who knows? I mean, this is the theory.
Hmm. And how it runs through in my mind is the fear of going, okay, I'm just going to surrender to this, surrender to whatever this state might be and allow it to be, is the fear that somehow I'll lose sight of where I would prefer to be. It's not rational because it hasn't happened so far. But I think in order for me to be able to go like, okay, I'm in this low energy thing, it feels like depression from a my understanding of that heaviness and the low mood is to allow it at the same time as kind of keeping my gaze up and looking beyond. So it's not about, oh, I'm fighting with where I am because I need to be there. I need to be there. But it's like, okay, I'm here and I'm here and I'm trusting that like this is where I'll come out to there. I'll come out to there. So keep lifting the gaze and remembering what it is that we want to come out to. And I think if I can hold that piece, it's much
Safer.
I can be much more willing to allow whatever this is to just work through and trust that I am going to come out. Because otherwise, sometimes if you allow it, it feels like a vortex. So it feels like you're just going to be sucked lower and lower and lower until, you can't even get out of bed in the mornings.
Yes. So I have a concept for that, which I call invitational windows. And I think about that. I'm literally sitting next to a window. So I think about like, if I were to open that window and let it be open, but here I am sitting here podcasting, right? Or doing what it is I need to do. But that window's open. And when there's something that passes by that I'm ready to take in, or that that I can like go to the window and breathe in that air or see what's out there, that window's open. I don't have to do that right now. And I don't have to go chase it outside. But when it comes through, that like to be aware, because what happens in my own experience and what I see happening too, is that when we're like, okay, no, I can't go outside. I can't be out there. I'm going to be here attending to myself. It can be vortexy because we have stories about that and we can sort of close in. And to what we were speaking about before, there's a tendency to move towards dysfunction once you're in it. But I think part of that is the story we tell ourselves and also the expectation that we have that like, I'm going to stay here. At some point, I have noticed that when the energy starts to change, when I have given myself the time and the space, whether it's inside of my own self-talk or outside in the things I'm doing or not doing, that there's a shift at some point, and it's very, very subtle. And I'm careful to try to perceive it, because at some point when the wind blows, I can be like, I do notice it. Like I do feel the breeze now, or I do sense that I could maybe engage. But I know in the past, anytime I would sense that invitation to engage again, there would be something inside of me that'd be like, no, whether that was because I had the shame of just being here in the first place, or because I don't know what other reasons it might be, because it would take energy, a little bit of energy to do that I would resist it and I would keep sitting here no matter how much was blowing through the window, and I would almost like block it out. Whereas now, like the invitational window is this, like when you feel invited to, that can be something that you can peek your head out and start to look at, and then you can come back in here and just sort of playing with the energy dynamic as it changes, so that you're not like rushing outside once you feel a little bit rested. You know what I mean? Like it's more of a dance back. And I think that as far as energy is concerned, that is how energy responds best, right? It's like it's going to explode if we do it too much too quickly, but to just sort of play with it. And that runs counter to a lot of ideas of like, okay, I should be done now. I've been resting for a week. I should be back out, instead of looking at it as like a slow movement back towards, with a lot of ins and outs, like the dahlia flower that we talked about.
Mm-hmm. It's a lovely concept and a nice analogy for people. I'm thinking about how my stories have changed over the years, and I'd be curious about yours as well. But I think much of the time, from what I understand of others' experiences as well, that it's combined with a story. It's a low feeling, and then there's a whole story that corresponds with that feeling. And the story used to be about me and how terrible I was, and all those very critical, I say, feelings that I had about myself, even more so than thoughts. But if I investigated my thoughts, it was always about that. That has shifted, but it sort of has widened into this more existential thing about life. So I think now when I'm in it, I don't feel mad at life. It's not like an anger, but I just think life is just too darn hard. Like, I don't have enough energy, or even like spoon theory. I don't have enough spoon theory to get enough spoon theory.
You have
I
enough
don't have,
theory.
oh, theory. I don't have enough spoons to get through. And that can sometimes just feel a bit scary, I think, and overwhelming. And yeah, it's just interesting how the story has kind of morphed. So I guess that's the next story for me to
Hmm.
deconstruct, having mostly, for the large part, deconstructed the stories about myself.
Right. No, it's the
And
stories about the world.
yeah, and sometimes an overwhelm of like suffering in the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. I have a client right now we just talked about this, and it's like the state of the, reading the headlines, and even interpersonally, the things we hear about happening to people. And I told you how I've been watching these videos of the universe, this concept of light and dark, black holes and stars and vortexes and expansion and contraction and all this. And I feel like I kind of have offloaded this concept because it's too much for me to this larger, like, there must be some order, including chaos as part of that order. To like the evidence of that microcosm, that, in the macrocosm, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. That story is everywhere. And therefore, to me, that almost is like, well, it must make sense somehow. I don't mean to say everything bad happens for a reason. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, like, there's something about everything that has both light and dark, and that sometimes my bias is a little skewed more towards the dark because there's so much of it, and also because that's where our bias is skewed. Like, I know that there's other times in my life that things don't feel dark, and that most of the time I'm able to access what's light, and that is present. And if I look for that and around me, I will find that everywhere. So I kind of hold that much larger. When it goes existential like that, I'm kind of like, that's not even mine to understand. I can't even do that. But it seems to be pervasive, and it seems to be meaningful somehow. And that's just that there is darkness. Yes, there is darkness, and that there's no out for that. And there's also lightness, both.
Mm.
It's like the pinnacle of like holding two things. That's kind of the point of what like glimmer tracking is and stuff like that, for to sort of like help counter that negativity bias. But I do find that glimmer tracking is only helpful when you're not depressed. Like, it's a helpful prevention. It's helpful to build your window of tolerance prior. But I think the vortex is too strong once you're in the darkness.
I don't know, for my own personal experience, so when I went through stages of keeping sort of gratitude lists where I'd write down 3 things at night I was grateful for, 3 people in the morning I was grateful for, and filled up notebooks with that, and just doing that consistently, even when I felt was
Yeah.
going through lower patches, I found
Yeah.
really helpful. But again, that was, I guess, routine. It wasn't like I hit depression and then went, right, I have to start finding things to be grateful for. So there wasn't quite that pressure, and it didn't matter if I didn't feel grateful. I was quite happy to look at it as a cognitive exercise, but to just keep getting my mind to practice finding things.
Yeah. See, I didn't
And
like
going
it.
really meta if I needed to. So just like even being grateful for living in a country that's relatively safe from a war standpoint.
Right. But then the depression would advocate, like, but there's people who's not, who can't, and that's depressing. Right. Like that whole
Yeah.
idea. I
But
think
I'm
that,
not trying to, it doesn't have to transform how I feel. It's just an acknowledgement.
yeah,
It's like a
right.
nod, as opposed to trying to rationalize what's a very visceral
Yes.
experience away.
But what I'm saying is, I think that approach is the tool, right? Like, it's not about the buts. It's simply about this approach of, not about trying to make yourself feel better. It's about simply just naming what it is, so that our negativity bias has a little more equivalence. That there's a counterbalance to that. It's not trying to convince one side or the other. It's just trying to name what is. You know how, going back almost a half a year ago, frivolous bullshit, like this idea of fun and lightness. I think that the intensity, some people who lean towards intensity, which can be highly sensitive people, can make that the intensity of energy, the bringing down, you know what I mean? And this lightness, this sort of looking at humor and integrating humor and wherever we can. Like, sometimes I think when we're depressed, it almost feels like a betrayal to move towards something funny. Like,
Mhm.
at least that's how I used to experience it. Like, and for anxiety as well, almost like it's very serious. Everything's very serious. And like this felt like a betrayal is how I think about it. But that is actually like such a I think it's so important. And I more and more as I get older, recognize the importance of laughing and allowing myself to take things less seriously sometimes, and actively pursuing that.
So, Steph, when you arrive in the UK in less than 2 days' time, can we go lipstick shopping?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can pick
we
the
can go.
color.
I was going to say I'm not a very visual person. I'll probably
Yeah.
get it all wrong, but we could go to like a proper makeup counter
I would love
and they can
to.
like look at your colorings and then maybe
I
help you
would love
find
to.
something that would go.
Are you going to do it too?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Yeah, I
I'm
would
happy
love
to.
to do that.
Yeah, let's
Yes.
do that.
Okay.
Do some frivolous bullshit.
Yes. All right. We'll post about it.
Yeah.
Watch our newsletter,
Yeah.
which I have to write. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Wheel.
hope that was helpful.
Yeah. Take from it what you will. We're just trying to talk about this through our own lens because this is such a broad experience. And,
Yeah.
and I appreciate there are people that experience major depressive episodes for all kinds of reasons. And hopefully some of what we've said has resonated.
We didn't
And
even
anything that doesn't, you can discard.
talk about like food really so much. I'm sure there's more questions about that. And like, yes, I think there's an intersection of like how to cope with depression and food at the same time.
Yeah.
Which we could get into it in another episode called How to Cope with Food and Depression at the Same Time.
Yeah.
Episode 225.
Yeah.
We'll mark it down. Okay, bye.
Okay. All right then, Steph. I'll see you in less than 48 hours.
Bye-bye.
Bye.